dare you to move up?
The slap echoed through the nightclub like a gunshot. Elena collapsed onto the wet floor, her emerald dress pooling around her like spilled wine. But she didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just stayed down, her eyes holding a secret that would destroy the man standing over her. Because while Damien Mitchell thought he was punishing his helpless ex-girlfriend, the titanium doors behind him were already opening. And the man walking through them didn't just own this club. He owned half the city's underground. If this story gripped you in the first 30 seconds, smash that subscribe button right now because what happens next will shock you to your core. I've got another mind-blowing story dropping tomorrow that you absolutely cannot miss. Drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. I love connecting with our community worldwide. Now, let's get back to the moment everything changed. Move. The shove came without warning. Elena's body slammed into the mahogany bar with enough force to rattle every glass on the shelf. Conversation died. Heads turned. The pulsing bass of the music suddenly felt distant. Damien Mitchell stood over her, 6 feet of designer suit and whiskey-soaked arrogance. His tie was loosened, his face flushed with that specific brand of cruelty that comes from a lifetime without consequences. Still clumsy as ever, Elena? His voice cut through the club loud enough for the VIP section to hear. Guess some things never change, huh? Elena caught herself against the polished wood, her palms flat, her breathing controlled. The neon lights, electric blue and blood red, painted her face in alternating shadows. Around them, the crowd watched. A man in an expensive suit looked away. A woman whispered to her friend. The bartender froze mid-pour. Damien stepped closer, his Italian leather shoes clicking against the damp floor. What's wrong? Finally learn to keep your mouth shut. She straightened slowly, the silk of her dress whispering against her skin. She kept her eyes lowered, not from fear, but from knowing. To everyone watching, she looked broken, defeated. Exactly what Damien wanted to see. I don't want any trouble, Damien, she said quietly. That only made him angrier. His face twisted into something ugly, something that had been waiting years for this exact moment. Trouble? You don't want trouble. He laughed, a harsh, grating sound that sliced through the club's baseline. You are trouble. You're the same pathetic. He didn't see the men in black suits sealing the exits. He didn't see Victor Kane, whose tattooed neck and stone-cold expression signaled a storm about to break. And he definitely didn't see the phone vibrating against Elena's hip. 3 words on the screen. On my way. The velvet rope offered no sanctuary, only a more expensive stage for Damien's performance. Elena stood near the glass balcony, holding a crystal flute of champagne she hadn't touched. The emerald silk of her evening gown caught the erratic flicker of neon from the street below. To strangers, she was elegant. To Damien, she was a ghost he'd forgotten he'd killed. Still playing dress-up, I see. Damien leaned against the railing, his jacket hanging open in calculated disarray. That dress is a bit much, don't you think? Screams for attention you don't know what to do with. Elena didn't flinch. She tightened her grip on the glass, feeling the cold condensation against her palm. Breathe. In. Out. Controlled. I'm just enjoying my evening, Damien. Enjoying it. He laughed. With what money? Last I checked, you were 1 step away from homeless after your dad died. He moved closer, whiskey breath and toxic confidence. You were always a walking disaster. I did us both a favor when I walked away. Elena straightened, silhouetted against the red and gold glow. She looked at him through her lashes. Not with fear, but with cold calculation. You should leave, Damien. Or what? He stepped into her space, close enough that she could smell the expensive cologne mixed with cheap cruelty. You'll cry about it. Her phone buzzed once against her hip. A single pulse. She knew what it meant. The slap came so fast, even Elena barely registered it. Crack. The sound echoed louder than crystal clinking. Louder than ice rattling in glasses. louder than the shocked gasps that rippled through the VIP lounge. Elena's head snapped to the side. Her shoulder hit the bar. She went down hard, one knee hitting the sticky floor, her hand shooting out to catch herself. Pain bloomed across her cheek, sharp and hot. But she didn't scream. She didn't beg. Damien stood over her, chest heaving, satisfaction written across every line of his face. "Stay down," he sneered, his voice dropping to something almost gentle in its menace. "It's where you belong." Elena lifted her head slowly. Through the strands of dark hair falling across her face, she looked at him with a gaze that wasn't fear. It was certainty. She knew something Damien didn't. Against her hip, her phone buzzed again. Softer this time. Private. She didn't need to look at the screen. Because the air in the room had already changed. The club doors exploded open with a force that swallowed the music. Conversations that had barely resumed after the slap died instantly. The air turned brittle. Pressure rolled in like a dark storm from a distant horizon. 3 men entered first. They moved with military precision, broad-shouldered enforcers in suits that cost more than most people's cars. Stone faces. Eyes scanning the room with professional detachment. They fanned out, left, right, sealing exits with the efficiency of apex predators securing their territory. Then Victor Kane walked in. He didn't rush. He didn't need to. Dressed in a black suit with a white shirt open at the collar, he moved with the unhurried grace of a man who owned not just this club, but the very ground beneath it. But it was the tattoos that made people's breath catch. Dark ink crawling up his neck like warnings written in a language everyone understood but nobody dared speak. Serpents. Geometric shadows. Promises of violence that was absolute and permanent. The crowd parted like a red sea. People stumbled backward, knocking over chairs, spilling drinks. Victor's eyes swept the room once. Then locked onto Elena, still on one knee on the floor. In that moment, everything else ceased to exist. The neon. The bar. The terrified witnesses. Gone. Damien, his smirk frozen in place, turned toward the intrusion. "What the hell is this?" His voice climbed an octave. "Some kind of rescue squad?" Victor didn't answer. He crossed the floor with measured steps, broken glass crunching under his leather shoes, each step echoing louder than heartbeats. He didn't look at Damien. Didn't acknowledge the man's existence. Instead, he knelt beside Elena. His movements possessed a gentleness that stood in terrifying contradiction to the lethal aura radiating from his frame. "Talk to me," he said quietly. His voice was low, controlled, almost tender, yet it carried the weight of a storm about to break. Elena looked up, her hair disheveled, face pale in the amber glow. Something private passed between them. A silent communication that made the air crackle with electricity. Damien laughed. Thin and uncertain. "Wait. Is this your new boyfriend?" Victor stood slowly, turning to face Damien with terrifying stillness. He adjusted his cuffs with deliberate care, his dark eyes fixing on Damien like a surgeon assessing a tumor. When he finally spoke, his voice was silk and broken glass. "My wife." The word crushed the room. It hung in the air like smoke after a gunshot, settling over Damien's slackening face as the color drained from his skin. "Wife." Damien's voice cracked. He gestured at Elena with a dismissive wave that was rapidly losing conviction. "Her. Did you pick her up at some charity event?" Victor didn't take the bait. Instead, he extended his hand to Elena, helping her to her feet with a gentleness that seemed impossible for someone carved from stone and violence. As she stood, he draped his perfectly tailored jacket over her shoulders. The fabric still held the warmth of his body. For the first time in 5 years, Elena didn't feel exposed. She felt protected. Armored. She met Damien's eyes through the strands of her hair. No fear. Only lethal certainty. Victor stood to his full height, his frame filling the space between Elena and the man who had dared to strike her. He adjusted his cuffs with rhythmic, deliberate care, movements carrying the kind of silence that made the entire room hold its breath. When he finally turned his full attention to Damien, his dark eyes were cold, calculating, assessing the man like a surgeon looks at a tumor. Something to be removed, not reasoned with. "You made a choice tonight," Victor said. His voice was soft as silk and sharp as broken glass, vibrating through the amber glow with the weight of absolute certainty. "You chose violence against someone you thought was powerless. You thought there would be no consequences because you didn't know who she belonged to." Damien stepped back, his expensive shoes scraping against the floorboards as he hit a bar stool, nearly toppling it. Sweat beaded on his forehead, his face pale under the harsh red and gold neon. "I didn't know," Damien whispered, his voice climbing an octave in desperation. "I didn't know she was married to." "That is your defense," Victor interrupted, his tone flat and dangerous. "That you assault women as long as you don't know their husbands." He took one step closer, his measured footfall echoing in the silence. "In this city, every breath you take is at my discretion. And tonight, you made me reconsider that allowance." Damien collapsed against the bar, his legs giving out like a puppet with cut strings. He looked at the three enforcers positioned strategically around the room, realizing the exits were sealed and the club had become his cage. He was no longer the predator. He was prey. Behind the protective shield of Victor's jacket, Elena felt the weight of the fabric settle around her like armor. But internally, old wounds were opening. The cold amber glow of the club faded, replaced by the flickering fluorescent lights of a hospital hallway 5 years earlier. She remembered the smell. Disinfectant and despair. "I need you," she had whispered into the phone, her voice breaking. "Please, I can't do this alone." Damien's voice had been distracted, sharp with impatient entitlement. "I'm in the middle of something. Can this wait?" Her father had died 3 days later. Damien came to the funeral, but stayed only 20 minutes, disappearing before the first shovelful of earth hit the casket. When she confronted him later in the apartment she had convinced her to rent, the one he never put his name on, he didn't offer comfort. He offered a verdict. "I can't be around this kind of negativity right now," he had told her, grabbing his jacket. "You're dragging me down, Elena. You're just stuck." She had been sitting on the couch her father had given her, the last piece of a life rapidly dissolving. "I just lost my dad," she had said, her voice hollow. "I just need time." Damien had laughed. A sound devoid of humor that echoed the harshness she heard now in the club. "You don't have time. You don't have a job. You don't have money. You don't have anything." He had looked at her not as a partner, but as dead weight. "I tried," he'd lied as he walked toward the door. "God knows I tried, but I can't save someone who won't save themselves." The click of the door closing that night had echoed for months. It was the sound of an eviction notice on the table and a funeral bill she couldn't pay. It was the sound of becoming invisible. Marcus had never asked where she went or if she survived. In his mind, her non-existence was proof he had been right to discard her. Now, standing in the club, Elena watched Damien cower against the bar, his face pale with the realization that the woman he thought he'd erased had instead reformed into something harder. Leaving her was the only kind thing he'd ever done, because it forced her to find out who she was without his mercy. She had rebuilt herself piece by piece in the shadows of the city, eventually finding a man who saw strength where Damien saw only burden. The flashback receded, leaving only the clinical reality of the night's reckoning. Damien hadn't changed at all. He was still the same coward who mistook kindness for weakness and chose cruelty to feel powerful. But tonight, the circle was finally closing. The bar doors clicked shut. A soft metallic sound that echoed like a hammer on a nail. The 3 men in black suits shifted their positions with professional detachment, making the air feel thinner. The neon lights of the street disappeared. The possibility of escape. Gone. Damien's eyes darted toward the exits. His breathing accelerated as he found his path blocked by massive enforcers with scarred faces and stone expressions. Victor moved toward the bar with measured, unhurried steps. His expensive leather shoes made almost no sound on the wooden floor, despite the broken glass scattered across it. He didn't look at the frozen patrons, but focused entirely on the man cowering against the mahogany counter. "You chose this place tonight because you thought it was neutral ground," Victor began, his voice soft as silk and sharp as broken glass. He adjusted his cuffs with deliberate care, the dark serpents on his neck shifting in the amber glow. "You saw a woman you believed was alone, and your instinct was to make her feel small, to feed your own ego. You mistook kindness for weakness and silence for surrender." Damien tried to speak, his throat working as he swallowed hard. "I didn't know. I didn't understand who she was with." "That is the core of your failure," Victor interrupted, his tone carrying absolute certainty. "My name is Victor Kane. In the Southern Corridor, they call me the Surgeon. I have rules. Rule 1, respect the hierarchy. Rule 2, honor the code. But the third rule is the only one that matters tonight." He leaned in closer, his dark eyes devoid of mercy. "Family is sacred. Elena is my family. She is the one who survived a past designed to destroy her, and in doing so, she became the anchor of my world. When you struck her, you didn't just insult a woman. You violated the territory of my empire." Damien's face went completely slack, sweat beading on his forehead as reality settled in. He looked like a puppet with cut strings, sliding down the bar until his legs barely supported him. "In my world," Victor continued, his voice dropping to a whisper that carried to every corner of the hushed room, "we do not negotiate with infections. We remove them. You walked into this club as a man with a past, but you will leave it as a lesson, a reminder of what happens when you mistake mercy for weakness." He snapped his fingers once. Sharp. Final. The enforcers moved as one, their steps synchronized as they closed the distance. Their stone-faced silence promised the sentence was about to be carried out. The three enforcers didn't rush. They moved with disciplined professional detachment that made the air in the club feel heavy and final. Damien stumbled backward, his dress shoes scraping against the wooden floor until he hit a bar stool, nearly toppling it in his desperation to find an escape that didn't exist. Victor raised one hand. The men stopped mid-step like statues. The waiting, the anticipation, the knowledge that they would move only when commanded was a psychological weight that made Damien's face go pale with horror. "Not yet," Victor said quietly, his tone flat and clinical. He removed his jacket, folded it with deliberate care, and draped it over a bar stool, revealing dark tattoos snaking up his forearms. Warnings written in ink and scar tissue. He stepped into the makeshift arena carved from old wood and broken glass, his presence filling the room with the unhurried grace of an apex predator. "You want to know the difference between us?" Victor asked, his voice soft as silk and sharp as broken glass. "When you hurt Elena, you did it to feel powerful. When I hurt you, I do it to teach a lesson." Victor moved like water. Fluid. Inevitable. Impossible to stop. He didn't use wild, angry swings. His violence was measured and precise. The first punch was a sharp jab to Damien's solar plexus that doubled him over, gasping as all air evacuated his lungs in a single whoosh. The enforcers hauled him back to his feet, forcing him upright so he could receive the next dose of reality. Each strike was calculated. Maximum pain without causing death. Ribs. Stomach. Kidneys. The soft meat of the thighs. The sound of flesh on flesh and Damien's raw, primal screams echoed off the walls, bouncing back to multiply in the hushed space where 19 people watched in horrified fascination. Victor was teaching him the same lesson Damien had tried to teach Elena, the crushing reality of what it feels like when someone decides you don't matter. After several minutes of clinical execution, Victor stepped back, his knuckles split and smeared with blood. He wasn't even breathing hard as he pulled out a white handkerchief to clean his hands. Damien hung between the enforcers like wet laundry, his face a mask of blood and tears. His arrogance beaten out of him onto the sticky bar floor. "Look at her," Victor commanded, his voice carrying absolute certainty. One of the enforcers grabbed a handful of Damien's hair and yanked his head up, forcing his swelling eyes to find Elena, who stood exactly where she had been, draped in her husband's armor. "You're still breathing," Victor said, his gaze as cold as stone. "That's mercy. Do you understand? Every breath you take right now is a gift I'm choosing to give you." He turned to Elena, a silent question in his eyes, offering her the final word in the closing of a circle that should have been closed years ago. Elena walked forward, each step deliberate, her heels crunching on the broken glass that littered the makeshift arena. Even broken and hanging between the enforcers, Damien was physically larger than her. But height carried no weight in the silence of the club. She stopped an arm's length away, close enough for Damien to see the woman she had become. The hardness in her eyes he didn't recognize. The calm he couldn't comprehend. Damien stared up at her, his face a distorted mask of blood and fear, his left eye swelling shut under the amber glow. "Do you remember what you said to me?" she asked, her voice quiet but carrying clearly in the hushed bar. "The day you left." Damien's mouth worked, but no words came. His breath hitched in ragged, ugly sobs. Elena didn't wait for an answer. "You said I was dragging you down. You said I was stuck in my grief and that you couldn't save someone who wouldn't save themselves." She paused, letting the memory of his cruelty hang in the air like smoke. "But you were right about one thing, Damien. I was stuck. I was stuck in the belief that I needed a coward like you to survive." Damien's eyes darted between Elena and Victor, looking for a sliver of forgiveness that did not exist. "I was," he started, but she cut him off with a gaze of absolute certainty. "You didn't leave because I was weak," she said, leaning in so only he could hear the steel underneath her words. "You left because my strength in the face of loss terrified you. You saw someone who could lose everything and still breathe, and it reminded you of how small you really are." Damien's face crumpled, the last of his arrogant facade dissolving into a confession he had spent 5 years running from. "You left because you were scared," Elena continued, her voice dropping to a whisper that echoed like an executioner's blade. "Tell me I'm wrong. Tell me you left because of my negativity and not because you were a coward who couldn't handle the weight of real life." Damien opened his mouth, closed it, and finally his head lolled forward in total defeat. "I was scared," he choked out, the words mangled by his split lip and shattered pride. "I couldn't handle it. I was too weak to stay." The admission landed with more finality than any physical blow Victor had delivered. Elena straightened, the borrowed jacket still draped over her shoulders like armor, her expression shifting to something more complicated. Recognition. And then profound peace. "I accept your apology," she said, looking down at the man who had once been her entire world. "But accepting it doesn't mean forgiving you. It just means I'm letting go of the weight of thinking I deserved what you did. I'm done." She turned her back on him, returning to Victor's side as the enforcers waited for the final command. Victor reached into his pocket and pulled out a single cheap key on a generic ring, tossing it into Damien's lap where he sat slumped against the base of the bar. "Blue sedan at the end of the alley," Victor stated with the cold, matter-of-fact tone of a businessman concluding a final transaction. "Registration and title are in the glove box. There's $500 in the console. Drive east and don't stop until you hit the ocean." Damien stared at the keys as if they were a venomous snake, his breath coming in shallow, jagged gasps. Victor crouched down one last time, his voice dropping to a whisper that was colder than the damp alley air outside. "If you ever come back, if you ever speak her name again, or even look in the direction of this city, the mercy ends." He didn't need to elaborate. The presence of the enforcers and the blood on his own knuckles spoke for him. Next time there won't be witnesses or a floor to collapse on. There will just be your name on a missing persons report that gets forgotten. A shudder ran through Damien's broken body as he gave a jerky, mechanical nod of understanding. Victor stood and offered his arm to Elena. Her hand looked small and elegant in the crook of his elbow. Together, they walked away from Damien without looking back, leaving him to be dragged toward the rear exit by the enforcers. In the doorway, Elena paused for a final moment. She pulled out a worn photograph, the last thing Damien had ever given her, and tore it into pieces that fluttered to the floor like snow. "Now you're gone," she said quietly. "Completely." The black luxury sedan idled at the curb, its engine a soft, expensive purr that contrasted with the violent silence they left behind. As the car wound away from the neon flicker of the club and up into the sleeping hills, the city lights became a distant, glittering tapestry. Inside the quiet cabin, Victor didn't ask if she was okay. He simply took her hand, his bruised knuckles a silent testament to the protection he provided. They arrived at a home of glass and light, a sanctuary where Damien's ghost had never walked. Standing before the panorama of the city she had once fled in ruins, Elena watched her reflection in the glass. She looked tired, quiet. But for the first time in 5 years, she looked whole. "He thought he left me with nothing," she whispered as Victor stood behind her, his solid form a wall against the world. "But nothing is a good place to start. When you have nothing, you get to choose what you build." She turned to face him, her eyes clear. "And I built myself." The storm was finally over, leaving a peace that was not empty, but full of everything she had survived and everything she no longer had to carry. As the dawn began to lighten the edge of the sky, Elena laced her fingers through her husband's. Finally home. Finally loved. And never once looking back. If this story moved you, hit that like button and drop a comment sharing your thoughts. Have you ever had to close a chapter in your life like Elena did? Let me know below. And don't forget, I've got another powerful story coming tomorrow that you won't want to miss. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you catch it the moment it drops. Until next time, remember, sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is walk away from someone who never deserved you in the first place.